Truelove, to tell you all a little bit about Truelove Seeds and our work with seed keeping and rematriation of indigenous seed varieties in particular. I'll also say that I'm originally from Northeastern Connecticut, so not far from Boston. So it's nice to be with you all today. Yeah, so Truelove Seeds started in 2017. That year we started growing for our catalog, and our focus is really on ancestral seed, keeping them in circulation and making them available to people of various diasporas, who want to reconnect and stay connected with their culturally important varieties. And so at Truelove Seeds, we have a very small farm, 2/3 of an acre, where we grow 125 different varieties of plants, 100 different species. And everyone that works with us focuses on our particular ancestral varieties. And so I focus on Southern Italian and Irish varieties. I have coworkers from, who are African American and African and Ecuadorian and Irish and, different parts of Southeast Asia and all over the place. So we all focus on crops from those particular regions. And we also work with growers from all around the country, including Danielle and Natalie, who focus on ancestral and regionally important varieties to them. And so we have maybe around 70 different small farms and gardens that we work with in that way. And we send back 50% of our proceeds of any one packet sale to the growers that we work with who grew those seeds. Before starting Truelove Seeds, I worked for 4 years with Dr. William Moyes Weaver of the Roughwood Seed Collection. And that is really where I developed a passion for focusing on seeds. Before that, I had worked for, a decade in the food justice movement, working in San Francisco and New York City. In particular, I worked with Just Food in New York City with community gardeners. And so when I moved to Philly and started working with Dr. Weaver, I learned that he had 4,000 varieties of heirloom seeds in his collection that had been started by his grandfather in the 1930s, 1932. And his grandfather had a lot of indigenous varieties in his collection already when Dr. Weaver found it in a deep freezer in the 1960s after his grandfather died. And then he also had many relationships with indigenous communities. And so while his collection really is best known for its focus on Pennsylvania Dutch heirloom, that is his family history, he also has varieties from all over the world. And so while I was working with him and growing these varieties, I met indigenous seed keepers through my networks and started to find ways to share back some of the indigenous varieties with their original keepers. And I also started growing a lot of the Lenape varieties, which is the region that we're in, is Lenape poking. And so I grew a lot of the Lenape beans and corn here, which felt very meaningful, for example, to grow the purple King Sessing bean in my neighborhood of King Sessing, Philadelphia, and kind of rematriate the seed itself to its original land. What was most obviously meaningful was actually connecting with Lenape people. And that was made possible through social media in particular, and being able to find Lenape people looking to reconnect with their ancestral varieties. And so when I started Truelove Seeds with my partner, one of our focuses was making sure that all of our Lenape varieties in particular were available for free to Lenape people wherever they are in the world. And so we shipped them back. We also started sharing 25% of our sales of any Lenape varieties with the Nanticoke Lenape tribe in South Jersey. And so maybe a couple years into Truelove Seeds, Natalie started his farm in Eastern Massachusetts, and because our focus is on ancestral seeds, I kind of pushed the Sicilian varieties his way. But he was also interested in growing the King Philip corn, which is in our collection, because it has roots in Eastern Massachusetts with the Wampanoag tribe. And so Natalie began growing the King Philip corn. The following year, the Food Project started growing it as well for our catalog outside of Boston. And I'd been building a relationship with Rachel Sayet at Mohegan, which is close to where I'm from originally, and had kind of reached out to her to see if there was anyone I could connect with at Wampanoag. First to rematriate the seeds and also send back a percentage of our sales to support food sovereignty work there. And she connected me with Danielle. And so we started talking on Facebook Messenger, and started talking about sending back the King Philip corn. And we got to the point where actually this last year, Mashpee Wampanoag, through Danielle's work, we started growing this corn again on their land with their community, and also sharing back some of the seed to Truelove Seeds for our web catalog. And so now you can order King Philip corn grown by the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. 75% of our sales goes back to the tribe. And so that's just a beautiful relationship that we've been so grateful to build over the last few years, especially last year. And part of our work with any of our growers is ongoing mentorship around the production or the seed keeping. And so it's been great to also just stay connected to Danielle and also loop Natalie in terms of mentorship around how to grow this corn, and particularly with a focus on seed keeping. And so that's kind of the background of Truelove Seeds and how we got to this point in terms of our amazing partnership with Danielle. And I'm going to pass it to Danielle to talk about what that's been like to grow the corn again.
Okay, thank you, Owen. So, I just want to start off by saying a little bit about how I just became a seed keeper. And so it really started through the food sovereignty movement. I'm really passionate about tribes reclaiming their food systems. And I was living out in Wisconsin at the time, because my husband is from the Ho-Chunk Nation, and I was working as the food sovereignty coordinator there. So I was working with the tribal members and helping to just create more community gardens and just educate folks on different type of heirloom seeds, or even just pre-colonial crops that are specific to the Midwest. Through that, I started to get more involved with the Native Seed Keepers Alliance, and sort of understanding a little bit more about what that group was doing, and sort of the philosophy on rematriating seeds, and the work that Rowan White was doing. And so I was, learning a lot about the importance of these plant and animal allies that our ancestors used to rely on, both physically and for food and sustenance, but spiritually as well. Then a friend and we founded the Singing Trees Farm, which is a 12-acre farm in Wisconsin. And through that experience, I was able to learn a little bit more about corn specifically. We were working with the green Weeâchumun corn, black Aztec corn, and the glass gem corn. And I was really able to sort of immerse myself in how this being likes to be tended to and grown, and the different soil conditions, and sort of all of that tender love and care that we put into these plant allies. So that was a great experience, but it it came to an end, and I ended up moving back to Mashpee and just growing my own garden. And all the while this was happening, I was working on a book about corn, a children's book. And so it was about 3 years in the making. And we were just going over and over the transcript and really trying to put a voice and life to corn. And the purpose was to revisit Thanksgiving, but through the eyes of plants and animals, and take out sort of the he said, she said about pilgrims and Indians, and imagine what corn would have, how she would have reacted, or what she would have said, knowing that newcomers were coming to the land, and sort of this idea that corn, she needs the human hand to survive. And she was looking around and noticing that, her native allies had perished because of the plague. And she was sort of in this moment of like, wow, I really could perish myself if there are no human beings to plant me anymore and take care of my seeds. So she then sees this boat, and newcomers coming. So it was a little bit of a blessing to her. And so her and her two sisters, they welcomed the idea of newcomers coming because they also saw that these people were also starving. So she sort of was the facilitator, the spiritual facilitator between the natives and the newcomers. And I'm sort of filling in the gap with this story and answering the question, well, why would the natives even have helped these people anyway? And so the book is, it's released now, but it's on stands and shelves in Barnes and Noble and Amazon in August. And it's called Kipanamuk's, oh, there we go. Might be a little bit blurry, but Weeâchumun's Thanksgiving story. I'll put a link in so you can read more about it. But I say that because when I had come back, Rachel and Owen had reached out to me. And this was when the book was still in manuscript form. So it was perfect because I was able to actually get to know, or have the opportunity to get to know, the personality of the actual corn I was trying to talk about and describe. Because the King Philip corn is the corn that is, native to our homelands here, and is the corn that our ancestors actually grew. So I was like, synchronicity is just beautiful. And it came at the most perfect time, because now visually, I think without that opportunity or speaking with Owen or even understanding King Philip corn, I would have had like a yellow corn, in the book. Whereas the King Philip corn is this beautiful red, yellowy, even kind of auburn color. And so it was like, it totally came together. And so I jumped at the opportunity to grow this corn. And so I approached the tribe and said, hey, this corn is coming back to our community. Let's all get excited and grow it together. And, everyone was kind of like, all right, we'll have this plot over here at the tribal farm and sort of do your thing. And it's kind of funny because I was already in the seed rematriation, world. So I felt I maybe underestimated, the knowledge or the importance, or the understanding that people may or may not have had in the tribe, because there was a little mini battle about, or like, oh, well, we're already growing sweet corn. Like, that's sort of the corn that we're choosing to grow and give to our tribal members and our elders. And I'm like, yeah, but we have this, other corn that we should be focusing on. And so it was a little bit of an educational opportunity as well, because we don't realize how conditioned we are just to realize that these that we have been indoctrinated with just the idea of that like food is just commodity. And so it was like trying to just explain how this is like a plant being that is literally somehow in the universe, like wanting to come back and be grown in our soil again. Like, and plant is alive and she has personality, and we have, myths and creation stories about her. Like, it's not about food. It's not about like, grilling it for barbecue or having it taste sweet, or like, it's like, this is a big deal. And so that was kind of my challenge, is sort of gathering momentum on the tribal side and creating more community around the sacredness of corn and around the sacredness of like bringing her back into the community and welcoming her back, and like how significant this is. Because according to the story and and the history, apparently this corn was stolen during the King Philip War, and as far as I'm concerned, this corn has not been grown by Wampanoag hands ever since, and that was like hundreds of years ago. And so it's really symbolic because it's us taking back control of our food systems. And it's really symbolic because, if we still subscribe to the idea that this plant being is a spiritual ally for us, she is our three sister, that she is in charge of, the divine feminine, abundance, that she is a part of the process of procreating, and that there are ceremonies, that were once relied upon for women and coming of age. Also, it's like amazing that she can be milk, that she can be, flour, that she can be just so many different things. And it's like just reminding ourselves about the power of this plant. And so I think I did well. I had about maybe 6 people who were with me through the entire process, including one of our two of our clan mothers, Anita Peters, she's the Bear clan mother, and then Marlene Lopez, she is the Rabbit clan mother. They were there growing out the corn as well, and then helping to water. And we had a ceremony in the beginning where we soaked her seeds, and we did a prayer, and we had a feast and invited the community out. And then when it came time to harvest, we did something similar where we sort of invited the community out to be a part of that process. So I think that people are becoming more interested in seed keeping, becoming, seed keepers. The idea of even having a seed library is something that tribal members are interested in. So it was a blessing that Owen had approached me, and that the seeds wanted to come back, and it was perfect timing. And I think that with the release of her story through the book, that more tribal members and more, woodland folks who would have been growing and eating this corn will want to also tend to her and grow her out. So I just want to talk just briefly before I pass it over to Natalie, just about my process of growing her out. And although I did have experience with other corns, it was, I was in the Midwest, was a totally different climate. The corn itself was totally different. So this I had grown out. We decided that it was appropriate to prepare her seeds about a week before the new moon in May. So we soaked them, we prayed over them. I used river water because the site of where I chose to grow her at the tribal farm, there's a river that just is like right there. So I'm like, well, let me use the same elements that are going to be there throughout the entire process. And I also did a smudging and a prayer of the grounds with a few other tribal members, sort of just asking the predators and the other elements and the birds and everyone else, like, hey, you know, I'm reintroducing her here, like, let's let her grow. And like, you know, let's welcome her essentially back to the land. So, you know, we really wanted to make this a big deal, but approach it more specifically on a spiritual level the entire time versus just about productivity or, you know, yield. So prior, I prepared the beds, and right now it's herring season. So we're in March. So, the herring are starting to run down here. And so I had a lot of tribal members donate, you know, the fish heads and the tails and just the other parts, the guts that they're not using. And I tilled that into the soil. I also added in seaweed and just to really make sure that the soil is, of course, nutrient rich, but I was using just natural, I guess, fertilizers that are local and from the area. So I really didn't want to introduce anything foreign into the soil. So then we planted it. We had, I had about 150-ish mounds. Each one had a herring in it. And then I planted, we planted on the new moon, the corn and the squash. And then we had waited about maybe 4 weeks or so until the corn was about, you know, the height of my hand, if not a little bit more. Then we planted the beans. And I wanted to keep it indigenous. So I also use the blue Shakamaxon bean, which is a Lenape pole bean that I received from Truelove. So, and then the bean or the squash was from the White Earth Nation. It's like it's in an Ojibwe word, but it's this really large squash that, you know, some tribal members had found in a clay sea pod that was, you know, pretty old. So they had rematriated that. So the corn, the beans, and the squash, they were all indigenous. And then I just sort of let the corn do its thing. I was more in an observation mode. I didn't want my energy to be aggressive and like be obsessive and, you know, over every little weed or like watering so I just really wanted to see like who this being was, to be honest. So and there was a few moments of like uncertainty where I was, you know, texting Owen, like, you know, the leaves are looking yellow or this or that. And so he put me in touch with the right people. But for the most part, I had two sides. One side I was weeding and doing sort of the traditional caring for it, you know, like weeding everything, leaving it bare, having the crops just grow. Then on the other side, I was just letting it do its thing. I was observing sort of the other weeds that were around. And I had no philosophy, except I was like, I'm just going to keep the flowering plants or the flowering weeds. Everything else is going to go. And I did that for the pollinator purpose. But I noticed that on the side where I did not weed as often, the plant or the crops, the corn and the beans, they grew more bushier and shorter. And it was almost as if like at one point in time, all the plants were around the same height. So I was like, oh, they like friends. They all kind of like want to grow together. Whereas on the other side, when it was just all bare and just the corn, you know, she shot right up and she was just like a tall, just going. And I was like, oh, that's super duper interesting, because without the other crops, there's no like self regulation on like height or pace. Like she's just climbing, you know, like just to keep going, to essentially reach for something or just keep going. There's nothing literally stopping her. So that was kind of interesting because it grew very tall, but there was about 2 stalks per mound, where the other ones, there was like 4 stalks coming out, and then there were more cobs forming. So I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So then I just, maybe around June, I re-fertilized with some wood ash, and then I remounded, because one of the elders in our community here, Chief Females, he has a background in, horticulture. He was saying this is the windy moon time. And had he had not told me that, yeah, all of my stocks would have just totally been, blown over and uprooted. So I spent that time putting, a handful of the wood ash and just really remounding it up. And that was just such helpful advice. But other than that, I just sort of let it do its thing. I didn't freak out even about August and it being like deathly hot. I just observed, like, I would mist every now and again, because I realized her leaves were holding and catching the water, in her leaves versus saturating the roots. So I was like, oh, okay, she's like storing, and it must be some sort of slow release that goes down. Because why else would that be like that, literally holding cups of water. And that seemed to work out. I didn't freak out about, that was like my biggest thing, because I have my husband in my ear, like, you need to go down there and water all the time. Like, it's so hot, they're going to dry out. And I'm like, no, they're not, like, because their roots are running deep, underneath the soil is still moist, like, relax, and plus we want her to get acclimated to the changes in the climate and have it be as natural as possible. Essentially, like, if she were growing without me, she has to adapt. So it was a really fun journey. When it came time to harvest, though, that's where I sort of like fell apart, because I was going off of the harvesting time for eating versus the harvesting time for seed. So I could have and should have just let it stay and just suck out all the nutrients. But I did harvest a little bit too early. So that's when I was in touch with Natalie from Owen, and I like made him come down to Mashpee and look at my corn, and he reassured me that it's okay. And something I didn't know was that it was still continuing to develop its color afterwards. So now all of the cobs are red. Whereas when I had picked them, they were more yellowy red. So I just want to thank Natalie and all of his experience with growing the corn, for just helping me to just stay patient and just, understand the process and the corn a little bit more, because I really didn't know what to look for in terms of signs for when she was ready. So that's my journey. I'm going to pass it over to Natalie, and I'll put the link for the book in the chat.
Thanks. That was an excellent story. So my name's Natalie, and I live in Plimpton. And I know Owen from Philly from way back. We've been doing seedy things together for a while. I don't know, I want to say like 10 years maybe. And I was lucky enough to help him out when he was at Dr. Weaver's place, and Owen's taught me a lot about collecting seeds and being maniacal about seeds. So I moved to Plimpton and have this piece of land, and he asked me to grow the King Philip corn. And I said, sure, because it's from here. And so we moved, and I planted this plot of corn in a field, and there was nothing else around it. And it had basically, it's been pasture for a really long time. And I was really unsure about how it was going to go. So I planted all this corn, and I fenced it with 7-foot high fencing, because there's tons of deer. And I thought, oh, I'm going to plant all this stuff and the deer are going to just go to town on it. And I planted it and it grew. And it was like magical because I'd never planted corn before. And I don't even necessarily have any connection to corn in any kind of way, except that I really like eating it. But I knew that I wasn't going to be eating this. It was just going to go back for seeds. And so it grew, and I had a similar experience with it growing to what Danielle was saying, which was that it grew really short on the outside and really tall on the inside. And I freaked out because I am surrounded by hundreds of acres of corn, sweet corn. And I knew that, and I know that corn pollen can travel 10, 15, 20 miles. And I thought, oh, that's it, I've ruined it. It's crossed. And I waited and I waited and I waited, and I'd go in, I'd check, and I'd have the same experience where I'd peel back a little bit and I'd say, oh no, it's yellow. I've ruined it all. What am I going to do? But I waited and I left it alone and I didn't touch it, and I don't have irrigation. So sometimes I would drag a bucket of water, and sometimes I wouldn't. But then we waited till about end of September and picked it all. And I kept peeling back the husks, and it kept getting darker and darker and darker red. And I thought, all right, well, maybe I didn't ruin it. And it turned out okay. And so I learned that through trial and error. If you just wait a second, it probably will be all right. And so I had that in my bag, and I was able to tell Danielle that at the end. But it was an interesting time for me to move to a new place that I didn't know anything about. And the corn was helpful to me to learn about the history of where I live, specifically where my house is, and to bring the corn to this specific place and to replant it in a place that has been taken away from the Wampanoag people, and that I know that where I live specifically has been inhabited by white people. In fact, the same lineage of white people since the early 1700s. It felt like I was giving it, I was letting the corn know that it never left, and that it's kind of always been here. So I feel really lucky to have taken part in that. Besides that, I feel like my role in it now is to just be support for Danielle when she needs, because as a non-native person, I feel there's a privilege in being able to grow this crop, but I also feel like I need to step back and not have it be my thing. That said, probably will do it a little bit if Owen wants me to, plus other things that I'll grow for him. But really my main role in this, I think now, is just to be technical support for Danielle if she needs it, in growing the corn in the future. And yeah, that's about what I have to say about that corn. And it's really beautiful and it is very special. And I am really grateful and lucky that I have been able to grow it. So thank you both.
Yeah, I wanted to know, Natalie, which is something I don't think I've asked you before, but if you had noticed anything, or if you could, describe the corn, on like as if it were being in the personality of the corn, or sort of the little nuances that you sort of observed with this particular plant being.
Yeah, she's definitely tough and is very drought resistant. And also quiet. I think, I grow in my garden, which is fenced still, but much bigger, might be maybe a quarter of an acre. There's a corner in that garden that's just that. The only thing that's been planted in that corner is that corn. And it's kind of her space. And I feel like now the garden's not complete until she's there, because I feel like she's sort of watching over the place, and not just the garden, but I feel like the entire area of where I live. And I have that same experience, I guess, that you had when you walk into it and you notice the leaves and how each one is different, and some are short and some are tall. And she just feels very comfortable, but a little bit sort of like, what are we doing here? Like not quite sure like who I am or like what's going on, in a memory sort of way. And maybe it's because, like I said, like I guess I now have a connection to corn, but I didn't previously. And I didn't grow it last year, but I think I will grow it this year. And I wonder what it will feel like in this now 4th year of growing her here. But watchful, I would say, very watchful plant.
Yeah, when I would walk into the plot, I was not only happy because I was seeing that she was surviving and growing, but I also felt, like you said, it felt comfortable. I felt as if the corn, and the reason why I backed off was because I felt like the corn didn't need a lot of meddling with. Like, I don't know. It felt like I got this, like I'm the first sister, essentially. Like I am fine, essentially. Like you don't have to, it's not like one of those temperamental plants where you have to like do anything. So I was pretty happy about that. And then the part that really stood out to me was some plants do really well, or they don't want to be in close proximity to other plants. I felt like this corn in particular liked the friends and wanted to be bushy and surrounded. And that was sort of the piece that is most prevalent in my memory, where I was like, oh, and I kept thinking that like, she likes friends, like she doesn't want to be isolated. Like, that's why she even grows with 2 other sisters. Like, she's a companion plant, like all around, I was like, oh, okay. So I just feel like for those folks who are looking for a corn that is easy and comfortable, and it was like, this is her land. Like it, she didn't need to get used to the, it's not going to take her 3 seasons to sort of get it together. Like, it's like, nope, you can be confident, like planting this corn and she'll just do her thing. So I just, I would encourage folks who are living on Wampanoag land to, try growing out this corn and just keeping us updated, because there is something significant about like, and you talked about memory, or you said that word, but she has genetic memory as well. And so it's interesting to see her remember it and like be comfortable back in her own land, and I say that because there was a little bit of difficulty when I was growing green Oaxacan corn, which is a Mexican corn in Wisconsin. Like it was like, that was something you needed to tend to. And we don't think about these seeds in terms of like their placement, or like they grow in certain places for a reason, and when we take them out of their habitat and just like, oh, let me try to grow this today, it's like, well, you have to realize that for thousands of years her genetic memory is not, may not be compatible with some of these new elements or minerals or, spiritual, components that are in the new space that you're growing. So I just was curious about that, from your perspective.
Can I ask Danielle, just like before we open it up to other people, I just really, really enjoyed both of your stories of growing the corn and your observations. And it was a beautiful sharing that we don't often get to hear, of that like intimate connection with the plants that we grow. And your so particularly powerful because of the return of the corn. But I want to know what you'll do different next year based on like all of this time you've spent kind of observing and interacting with the corn.
So I'm going to put her in around the same area that she was grown last year, but just sort of flipping the crops. So she'll be in a new location, but still within the same soil. I think this time I will try the group approach, and doing the less of the weeding. But more so, I don't think that my methods are really going to change. I think I really want to do a little bit more of an aggressive approach with the community. I really want more community members to experience growing out this corn. And also, you know, I want people to get to know this corn. So I'm hoping that I'll have two groups, you know, that will help me. One, sure, doing the labor, growing her out, getting to know her. But on the other level, you know, just sort of going into the King Philip story and doing a little bit more research about the corn, you know, and just doing a little bit more fact checking about, you know, the burning of the fields and who may have been holding on to these seeds and how they just sort of made their way or were preserved. And then, you know, the Mashpee Wampanoag word for corn is Weeâchumun. So I'd like for us to start saying her name, you know, and just calling her, you know, by her name and who she is. And I'm in the works of just drafting another story, because yes, it was King Philip's corn, you know, it was like those were he was growing Weeâchumun, you know. So I'd like to put another perspective to how I did with the Thanksgiving story, but talk about maybe Metacom and, you know, King Philip's relationship with Weeâchumun and sort of what she did at the time. And you know, I just want to say, I just want people to understand her a little bit more spiritually, as well. So I'm also a doula and a student midwife, and prior to having my hands physically touch Weeâchumun, I was constantly dreaming of her during my pregnancies, when helping other women. And she is so unbelievably powerful. And there's definitely a relationship with plant midwifery and midwifery. And I would love for us to continue to explore that theme, and for more women to embrace her in that experience. So yeah, there's a lot that has to be done now that she's back. You know, I really feel like growing her is the easy part, because she just can do that on her own. You know, it's more about having the community honor her and welcome her back.
We could totally also change the name that we used for her at any point. We're always trying to find the true names, you know, for the plants, at least from the people who they originate from. So that's something we could explore too.
Yes, we can definitely, the story is good, but we should definitely incorporate her name and the meaning behind her name, and have that in the description as well. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm open, if you guys are, for questions from folks. Either, you know, you can just unmute yourself and ask a question, or type it in the chat, but we do have maybe 15 minutes for that.
I don't know if you have had a chance to glance at the chat. There's a lot of really beautiful appreciations. If I can, I'm happy to read them out, or I would definitely recommend flipping through them.
Yes,
Yeah.
please read them out.
Sure. Okay. And then in the meantime, people can take the space to think of any questions they want to ask anyone in this panel. Kristen Wyman said, sorry, when you were talking about the original struggles, like growing the corn, sorry, this was a struggle for you during a time of such beauty and power, an affirmation from the ancestors. Maria says, thank you for sharing this amazing story and journey for you and your family and community. I've had the good fortune to meet some traditional Mohawk midwives over the years, and this puts me in mind of hearing from Katsi Cook about how part of her training as a midwife was to raise a field of her tribe's corn. Thank you for drawing the connection to plant midwifery and healing midwifery. Amazing. And then, yeah, I mean, yeah, just other positive, looking forward to the book. How a question came in, how would you feel about non-native people growing her out? Would you have us also sing to her, pray, and have a spiritual relationship with her? And is growing her in a mound important?
I feel okay about non-native people growing her out, because I truly believe that Weeâchumun is non-discriminatory, just like any other plant being. And, corn has mutated and, has grown all over the world, essentially. So from her perspective, like, everybody deserves to eat. She's not going to, she wants essentially probably to merge spiritually with everyone on this planet. She is so powerful. So I would suggest everybody grow out corn and ingest her, and get to know her. So yes, sing to her, pray to her. She will come to you in your dreams. She will come to you in different ways. You just have to be open and receptive to that and believe it beyond it being some sort of Native American like mythology, that you're going through the motions of, but you actually have to accept and acknowledge that these plant beings are spiritual beings first before they're food for us. Then I would say, yes, I think growing corn in a mound is important, because I look at her structure like this, and it's like she's on her toes and she has to be supported because she has like weak ankles. So she needs definitely to be supported. And for us over here, the windy moon was a real thing. Like, it was coming through. And that's why I feel like they should be closer together and not so exposed. And so, sometimes rows work, but sometimes they don't. So I also kind of got creative with how I positioned them. So I did 18 inches apart, but I didn't do straight rows. I sort of just did 18 inches apart and like fit as much as I could in the space, because I could walk around her. I don't need to walk up and down her. And I also don't necessarily believe in that sort of linear. I was trying to keep it as natural as possible. Like, how would she just procreate? It wouldn't be in, a line. It would be all over the place. But yes, I think that she needs the support. And let's say she didn't have the support. I think that maybe her roots would be, I don't know, Natalie and Owen might help, but like, maybe you could talk about, if you guys have grown and not in a mound, how her roots sort of express themselves, but mine were very like tippy-toey. They were very tall, and they were together, so they weren't as spread out to support her. So
I grew my corn in a way that I learned from, I used to have a plot in a community garden, and it was mostly older African-American gentlemen, a lot from them. And they planted most of their crops in a way that I wasn't used to, which is, instead of planting on top of the mound, they planted in the furrow. So I would make a furrow with the mounds on the side and plant the corn in the ditch, basically. And maybe then when they were about 2 feet tall, I would go back and push everything from the side and mound them this way. So I guess kind of the same idea, just but with rows. Because I think what you're saying is correct, is that the roots really needed some support.
Yeah, that's so true. I didn't, the mounding was a process over time. So like I had smaller mounds that were actually flatter on the top like this, because I just common sense, I observed, well, when I watered it, the water trickled off and went to the sides, and then it left what was growing in the middle to be dry. So I realized like, oh, that makes no sense to peak it right now when it's just starting to grow. You peak it when the roots are more developed later on. So I think that was a good point.
Yeah, I've always done it the way Natalie was describing, but I've seen a lot of the mound like techniques that you're describing, Danielle. And while we were talking, I was like, oh, that's how we're gonna do it this year. So it's harder to do because we grow in row crops everywhere else in our field. So I'm just gonna fit in your mounding style within our kind of row crop system and see how it goes this year. Yeah. One thing I do for seed when we're growing kind of in rows is I will kind of, once they've already tasseled and the cobs are starting to form, I actually usually grow in 3 or 4 rows at a time, and I'll like bunch their tops together loosely with a string, just so that that they hold each other up. And that really works for us for seed production, and keeps them all from falling over.
That's a good method.
Yeah, I do it loosely, so it's not like cinching them too tight, but they're using each other's strength to stay up.
So Renee had a follow up with how many Weeâchumun seeds are in a mound and how many squash and bean sisters per mound. So I did 2 seeds per mound. But then there was a situation where we didn't realize, because there was a few hands that were seeding. So there ended up being sometimes 6 seeds in a mound, and they all did fine. But yeah, I did 2, just because of, if one for the animals, one for us, essentially. And then I did the squash around the perimeter, actually, because the squash that I grew was really, really big. So I did not do 1 squash in each mound. I did them more sort of in the walkways. So we did maybe about, not that many, but about 10 to 12 squashes, because they crawl. So they were doing their thing and just shading the soil and just, traveling all around. And then the beans, I just did 2. I did 1 next to each plant, which wrapped up fine on the stalks.
I went to visit a few years ago a Native American seed sanctuary that was with the Akwesasne tribe of the Haudenosaunee Nation down in the Hudson Valley, working with something called the Hudson Valley Farm Hub and Seed Shed through Hudson Valley Seed Company. And Rowan White was an advisor on that project. And their mounds were maybe 4 or 6 feet wide. And I didn't count, I don't remember exactly, but it seemed like maybe there were 10 or 15 corn plants in each one. And the beans were like climbing up them, but then squashes had different mounds. Like nearby, but the similar concept. Like that's what we do too. Sometimes we'll grow beans on our corn, but our squash will be a row away or something, so it can vine in, but not like pull down from the. And there was a Lenape project in North Jersey that had a very similar model. And their mounds might have even been bigger, like maybe 8 feet. But similar, that beans grew up the corn and then squash were in different mounds interspersed. Yeah.
Wow.
It was cool. It was cool to see. It was so radically different than how I was raised to grow those things. and they seemed really happy.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that there's one, any one way, that they're really adaptable. Yeah. But yeah, any other questions, I guess?
Go ahead, Jen.
Yes, I was wondering, so would that also work in like the Boston area or up in Maine, or are there different varieties that are native to those particular areas?
I'm actually unsure of the varieties that are grown up that way. I don't know if Owen would know a little bit more, but that is going up into, or at least up in Maine, and that's sort of the Wabanaki, Micmac area. So I'm not actually 100% sure. But Boston, I feel like, oh, somebody said there's an Abenaki red corn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a Abenaki red flint called, sometimes it's called Roy's Calais Abenaki red flint. Yeah, and I know a lot of people grow it up in like New Hampshire, Vermont, and probably Maine too. Yeah, I'm not sure closer to Boston if there's a different one.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. That's sort of part of the research, that I'm hoping that some of our tribal historians will be able to help out with, just understanding, within the Wampanoag territory and using historical documents of what we can find, because obviously the natives were not necessarily writing, but through the accounts of maybe the settlers, what was being grown, or and where it came from, what it looked like, and so that's sort of the next phase. But in terms of currently what are sort of modern natives growing out that way within the Wampanoag territory, I'm not 100% sure. There are some folks on this call that are within the Boston area in Nipmuc territory that may be able to, shed a little bit of light.
I just grabbed this book too, if you're looking at, it's hard to see books with these blurred backgrounds. That's about Abenaki traditional varieties and growing systems. And actually Stephen McCumber, one of my friends and mentors who's Haudenosaunee, who's Mohawk, was an advisor on this book as well. And there's a lot of crossover. So there's, some of our distinctions between places and people, are artificial. Like there's a lot of movement of varieties between peoples. So some of the things listed in this book are also Mohawk varieties. So I wouldn't be surprised if the corn we're talking about now was grown in Boston, the Boston area. It's probably grown throughout parts of southern New England. So.
Oh, just in case folks didn't see it, Kristen said in the chat, from what I understand, white, which is similar to the King Philip, is grown in the Boston area. I just want, it's not really a question, it's just a comment, but I feel as someone who's grown plants for a lot of years, in various contexts, really inspired and just like appreciative of the way that you all talk about the corn. I think that I'm curious about the plants I grow and I love them, but I think this is like a different level of sort of respect and really curiosity and desire to get to know the plants that I think just sounds like it would bring a lot of joy and interest and a whole different element to growing. So I'm like excited to try to keep a little bit more of that in my heart and my hands when I grow this year. So thank you.
Thank you. Kristen said Keely Curtis is recreating the white flint, and Keely is who I talked to about the food project growing this King Philip corn originally. yeah, and a great help in this, with this type of work. There's a lot of work around rematriation right now with seeds. And Danielle, I'm glad you brought up Rowan White, because she's creating a resource right now on examples of seed rematriation, and she'll be including this particular story as well. So if people aren't familiar with Rowan White's work, you definitely look her up. Amazing Mohawk seed keeper.
I'll also note that last year's Gardeners Gathering Keeley led a workshop on rematriation of seeds. I'm like trying to find the recording on YouTube to share out right now, so bear with me for a minute.
Does anyone have any more questions while Annabelle's looking for that? Also, we can make sure, so all of the slides, well, if people had slides and shared them, or recordings or other resources, we're going to put into a folder for everyone who registered, and you'll get it next week. So we can make sure to keep the link for Keely's presentation from last year in that link, in that folder too. In case it's not easy to find now, Annabelle.
I'm struggling.
It's fine. We can put it in there and folks will have access to it. Oh, and thank you for that, the Seed Keepers Network. So I guess we're just about at time. Do you want to? Oh, here we have another question.
Mhm. I would love to find a bean and a squash that is also Wampanoag. So if you have any leads, let me know. I don't have any right now, but that would be ideal.
Well, I want to say thank you to Danielle and Natalie for doing this panel together. It's such an honor and a treat just to even get to spend this space time with each other. And also to everyone who joined this conversation. Thank you to the conference organizers as well. This is great. So appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. This was such a pleasure. So if anyone has any, comments or anything, I put my website up there. So feel free to reach out at any time. I'm available. So thank you, Owen and Natalie and the trustees of Boston. This is great.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much, Owen, for helping organize this panel and connecting us with Danielle and Natalie. Like really inspired to hear about other local growers. Hope you guys will continue to check out workshops. We have 3 more sessions, one this afternoon and 2 more sessions tomorrow with a bunch of really great workshops. Can resend the link for the program in case you lost it. And we'll work on getting that recording out as well as the other materials as a follow-up. Definitely check out Truelove Seeds if you're still looking for seeds. Also shout out Danielle runs Wampanoag Trading Posts, which is in Mashpee. Both of those websites, there's like little ads in the program for them. So if you can also just Google them, but if you want to find the ad in the program, you can do that too. Both really great businesses to support. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's it for now. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.